Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Clayton. Since we're at the end of the year and since I've reviewed a lot of movies, I'm sure you'd all agree that this year has been a year of extreme ups and downs. And when it comes to movies, there have been some films that I've absolutely loved and some films that I completely despise. So, I'm going to make two lists, the top 10 worst and the top 10 best films of the year. So let's start with the worst so we can get the painful ones over with, shall we? I have a list here for the top 10 worst films of 2016, starting with number 10, Ratchet & Clank. Now, Ratchet & Clank has a few things to its merit. The animation's okay, and it's just nice seeing Ratchet & Clank on the big screen, but with its cliche story, with its constant references that don't work, and the fact that the whole idea of Ratchet & Clank works way better as a game than it is as a movie, it really makes you realize that you were better off just playing the old Ratchet & Clank games rather than playing this poor man's version of the experience. Number 9, 9 Lives. Ironic, but I didn't put it onto the worst list just so I can make that joke. 9 Lives is a truly terrible film that completely ruins Kevin Spacey's talent with bad comedy, a premise that's basically just those cat videos if you stretch them to 90 minutes, and acting that's so atrocious that everyone who's associated with the film looks like an idiot. I can't believe Christopher Walken was suckered into it, personally. Number 8, Allegiant. Am I the only one who thinks that the Divergent films were never good to begin with? Because they were never good to begin with. Riding off the coattails of Hunger Games and other teen adventures of that caliber, Allegiant is an incredibly boring film that has Shailene Woodley as the only really good actress, and that's about it. Number 7, Gods of Egypt. Questionable casting aside, the effects are beyond cheesy, the story is predictable as all hell, and for a film that was really obviously made to be a so bad it's good film, it can't even reach that low bar when it comes to its bad dialogue, its horrible acting direction, and the fact that the film's actually not that exciting when it comes to its action sequences or the environment that it's in. Number 6, Independence Day Resurgence. The original Independence Day wasn't a classic by any means, but it was a suitable action film that had great special effects, cheesy but still enjoyable acting, and it had that American pride element that really made people rally towards it. Plus, it had Will Smith, one of the most charismatic actors of our time, and even in the 90s, who helped make the film an enjoyable watch. I still think the Men in Black films are better, but if Will Smith wasn't in Independence Day, it wouldn't be half as good as it is. Independence Day Resurgence not only doesn't have Will Smith, but it doesn't have any of the charm or spontaneity of the original Independence Day, and it just feels like a rehash of the original, with better special effects and worse everything else. Number 5, Ben-Hur. Speaking of better special effects but worse everything else, Ben-Hur was a cinematic landmark in the 1950s. That gave Charlton Heston his first ever Best Actor Oscar, and it told an epic story with a scale that was never before seen in Hollywood. Ben-Hur comes at a time when that cinematic scale has been recreated God knows how many times, and where its storytelling chops can't hold a candle to the original. And how is it that the chariot race scene from the original film is more fun to watch than the chariot race scene in this film? And that film had the restrictions of the 1950s on it. Number 4, Alice Through the Looking Glass. When it comes to Alice in Wonderland movies, I'm still gravitating towards the Disney animated version. It's really the only one that's able to capture the whimsical charm of the original, while also it's not capturing its nonsensical nature. And trying to bring sense into the world just doesn't make any sense for the story, ironically, which was the problem with the first Alice in Wonderland movie. Alice Through the Looking Glass not only has very little to do with the second book of the same name, but it ends up being even more repetitive and even more diluted than the first film, with really only Sacha Baron Cohen's character time being enjoyable at all. But hey, one enjoyable performance doesn't help your film become good, you know? Number 3, Jack Reacher Never Go Back. Speaking of unnecessary sequels, I actually was looking forward to Jack Reacher Never Go Back, considering that the original Jack Reacher was friggin' great. Yeah, Tom Cruise wasn't the best guy to play Reacher, I would have chosen someone bigger, but he had enough charisma and enough cheesy one-liners to make it an above-average action film with some good gunplay and cool fight scenes. Jack Reacher Never Go Back feels like a direct-to-DVD sequel, just with better actors and better fight choreography that never really gets off its feet. Kobe Smulders does an okay job as his partner, but otherwise the film's a completely unnecessary sequel that really doesn't justify its own existence, and it's just not that fun to watch anyways. Number 2, Incarnate. Aaron Eckhart tries his hardest, but Incarnate is basically a copycat of Inception, Exorcist, and a bunch of other films, to the point where it barely feels like an original film in its own right. And considering that this came from the same director who did San Andreas, would we really expect that much? When you add in bad special effects, an obviously very low budget, and a storyline that feels incredibly long, even for its very short runtime of only 80 minutes, and you've got one for the ages. I'm surprised this one isn't on more worst films of the year lists. Now, before we get to number 1, here are a few honorable mentions that I have. My first honorable mention is the Blair Witch movie. Now, I wasn't a big fan of the first Blair Witch Project, but I could see its appeal, considering that the Blair Witch Project wasn't a unique film for its time, and it really got the found footage genre of filmmaking going. And it was interesting seeing a horror film where the horror was what you didn't see rather than what you did. This Blair Witch movie at least looks like, at first it looks like it's trying to do something different, when really it doesn't even try to do anything different, as it's a rehash of the original, but with none of the originality or spontaneity that made the original fun. And since it ends the same way in a similar fashion to the original film, there's pretty much no reason to see it whatsoever. It's obvious that the people who made it were just cashing in on the original Blair Witch. It's not as bad as Book in the Shadows, but let's face it, most films are way better than Book of Shadows. Blair Witch 2. And the other big honorable mention I'll choose is TMNT Out of the Shadows. Is it as bad as the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie? I wouldn't say so. At least I had a little bit of fun with Bebop and Rocksteady. But the film is just all over the place with its story. It ends in a very similar fashion to the first film, and despite having so much TMNT fan service with Baxter Stockman and Krang and Karai and all of that, the film still has a staleness to it. Maybe Michael Bay should finally stop ruining our franchises, right? Anyways, the number 1 worst film of the year, Norm of the North. Because pretty much everything. The acting's atrocious, the animation looks like something you'd see from a direct-to-DVD film, not an animated film released in theaters. Rob Schneider is cancer in pretty much everything that he's in, and let's just say that there wasn't a single moment that made me laugh. The animation is the worst. It never looks like it had any effort put into it. The story is the worst. It never makes any sense. The characters are the worst. They're all just stereotypes of one-dimensional tropes. And the execution is the worst. I mean, it's like the entire film was written as a joke, but with no good setup or punchline. It's not only one of the worst film of 2016, it's one of the worst animated films I've ever seen in my life, period. Let's just hope that it never gets a sequel. So, that was my list. I hope you enjoyed, and in a few days I'll talk about the best films of 2016. See you later.